If past historical buildings are the windows to our heritage, are we listening? If today's construction signifies our future, what are we hearing? If our walls could speak, what would they be saying? In this brand new 6-part series that looks into the inspirational work of architecture in Singapore, listen to the stories from the buildings that surround us, journey through designs from our old and new landscapes, and be enriched by our heritage and our ever-changing future. In the early 20th century, most poorer Singaporeans were living in squalid quarters. As Singapore developed, the population increased rapidly. In response, the Singapore Improvement Trust, or SIT, was set up in 1927 by the British colonial government to pave the way towards modern urbanization.
SIT is one of the first modern introductions of public housings in Singapore. The oldest public housings built by SIT during the beginning of the establishment of these institutions still exists until today. And this housing area in New Bridge Road now is used as Hotel 81. So on the next stage, SIT initiated another development in Tiong Bahru area, the semicircular block with internal semi-public space. The round shapes of the balconies is part of a modernist style called streamline. People in the 40s, in the 50s, especially the architects, like to use that kind of style. The streamline is like the smoothness of aeroplanes. So that kind of form carry an ideology of modernity.
Sanson Ng provides a living voice for the SIT flats which stood at Upper Pickering Street. They were built in 1952, and the estate was one of the earliest developments in Singapore's high-density public housing. In 2004, the flats were demolished. The site now sees the construction of a future hotel.
So there used to be 5 very beautiful buildings here. These buildings were then the tallest in Singapore then. I spent all my life here. I have very fond memories of this place. Even till now, I still have dreams about this place, you know. We're actually standing on the 2nd story of this hawker center. I used to eat here all the time. My block is actually just right before the green drums over there. So you can see a lot of construction going on now.
Sensing the impending fate of his home, Sanson, who is a practicing architect, made detailed records of his flat to aid his memories.
One interesting element that I found in my SIT flat then was this long veranda space, you know, where I have very fond memories of. And at that time, there's no need for air conditioning or no particular demand for air conditioning because the flat is so well ventilated. And the British architect then designed the flat such that it's orientated away from inclement weather, where they have really taken into account orientation then. So you can see the veranda is so long compared to the veranda now, you know. I sleep here, my brother sleep here. So you can see this is the living room connected via the bedroom to the veranda space. So to access the living room, I always have to pass by this transitional corridor space in a sense.
Curvy staircases made a distinct facade. The staircase landings became communal spaces, as the doors of 2 units opened directly to each floor landing.
This staircase is quite an iconic feature in the SIT flats then, where I can just stand along the staircase and talk to my neighbor next door. I don't need to phone call, I can just go next to the staircase and talk. It's sort of like a protective barrier in a sense. There's no such thing as lack of security concerns. There's no theft, no privacy issues. My mom always cut my hair at the staircase landing and the neighbor will just sit there chatting together with us.
Sadly, these blocks gave way to further urban planning and modernization. Its impact left what could have been a missing link in Singapore's architectural history.
I think as typical Singaporeans, we just accept the norm. When you're told to move, you will move. We weren't thinking about petitioning against the move. We were very sad then actually, but my parents have never thought of relocating. We have even actually thought of asking the housing board then whether we can buy the flat, because at that time the SIT flats are not for sale. You can only rent the flats.
Does modernization equate to demolishment and rebuilding? Just how much of our architectural heritage are we giving up for today's redevelopment?
If you are talking about sustainable architecture, about energy crisis, about green architectures, these are definitely green aspects of the buildings of architecture that we can learn, that we should perpetuate it and preserve it and reuse it and learn from it. When the SIT flats at Upper Pickering Street been demolished some years ago, I feel very sad actually, because we are losing a very precious heritage, modern heritage, which is part of our memory. So it's like losing part of your brain, so you can't remember anymore because you can't see it anymore.
If our walls could speak, they would tell of Singapore's progress since the early 70s and how high-density living became part and parcel of our lives today. After public housing paved the way for high-density living in Singapore, the private sector brought about surprising innovations to the field. In the commercial realm of private housing, opportunities arose for the architects to find more grounds for creative development and even experimentation. Mr. Tan Cheng Siong is none other than the principal architect of Pearlbank Apartments, a bold pioneer for high-rise, high-density living even till today. This man had played such an important part in the history of Singapore's private residential architecture. Standing in towering isolation on Pearl's Hill, the apartment is a 38-story condominium. 10 vertical walls rise through the entire height of the building, making it the tallest residential block in Asia back then in the late 70s.
Pearlbank came about as a bombshell to us, It's something that we never expected because at that time Singapore was pre-condominium time and we only had shop houses and nice-story apartments, walk-up apartments. And being a rebel type of character myself, I just imagined something crazy like that. We thought we would never get it approved by the government. But fortunately, even the developer saw the potential. So we were fortunate that Pearlbank came about. The idea, much like Le Corbusier, the French master architect, suggested, that we all should live in high buildings in crowded cities so that we can get plenty of air, plenty of light, and plenty of views. So it is what we conceive as correct. And I think it predicted the 21st century. Newspapers at that time wrote about people being blown away in a typhoon, or dinners get eaten up by something that flies in, or something like that. So there were much resistance. And the biggest resistance were the bankers. They would not finance the building. So it was fortunate that we crossed those difficulties.
Many challenges were surmounted with striking solutions, foremost of which is the horseshoe shape of the block. Kitchens and fire escape staircases are clustered around the inner ring of the horseshoe. This forms the rear-end public area, partially concealed to the external view and oriented towards the west.
Every building has two sides, the front side and the back side. Usually people neglect the back side. Not supposed to show people. But in Pearlbank it's different. It is where people congregate, people come. And the horseshoe gave us that possible contact space. The horseshoe shape also performed another function. It performed the function of handling the fierce afternoon sun.
Living rooms and bedrooms were put on the outer ring of the horseshoe. They form the front-end private zones facing the east and enjoying a superb view of the central district, as well as Pearls Hill Park below. Mr. Isaac Chin is one such resident who enjoys the view and use of the park.
To me, this is a very interesting park because ever since I moved to Pearlbank 10 years ago, I have been exercising here every morning in this park, and it has given me very good health. I think it also gives very good feng shui. I choose to stay here for various reasons. Number one is because of the location. We are only 3 minutes walking distance to the Outram MRT. Number two reason is that we have all the modern amenities around us. For example, just across the road, we have the Singapore General Hospital. Thirdly, because Chinatown is just below us, it's so convenient. It's where I was born.
Its coherent form belies how 272 units of different sizes are stacked and interlocked together. Each apartment is a logical complex of domestic spaces on multiple levels, which lends drama and depth to its layout. The different levels also zone out each unit into private and public areas.
The split level idea gave us the inspiration that we could have fluid, flowing spaces that is three-dimensional, is more volumic.
In the turbulent climate of the property market, Pearlbank's ingenious design is no guarantee of its survival into the future. In 2005, Pearlbank faced a uniquely Singaporean property deal, the en bloc sale.
To stimulate the market, we have to use the en bloc exercise by taking over people's home for a good value and then rebuilding on the same site. So in that exercise, we are actually creating value for Singapore's properties.
En bloc came as a surprise, of course, to many people. I think it's a bad thing if by a sheer, mere vote, a special building can be just knocked down for profit. I think that's a shame. The kind of thing that makes people wonder whether it's worthwhile to really spend time to do good buildings.
I think Pearlbank is a very beautiful building, very unique. But on the other hand, if you ask me about en bloc, I have to tell you about the feelings of the residents here. A lot of them have complained to me that the building is too old. There's a lot of repair costs to them. The maintenance is very high. And then in their old age, they need the money. I love this place. I don't mind to stay here for the remaining years of my life. But on the other hand, I must be sensitive to the feelings of the residents here. I cannot be so selfish just because it has a sentimental value to me.
Yes, I believe modern cities should have super high rise. And we don't have to crowd ourselves on the ground anymore. We must go high, free as the birds, enjoy the views. And of course, natural ventilation. Design for city is definitely the need for the future. If you don't have good design, cities will not be able to renew itself. It won't be sustainable without creative design. We were talking about 1 million population. It's a frightening figure 40, 50 years ago. But now we are talking about 5 million, 6 million. So these have to be solved. And I sincerely believe that high density, high rise can give the answer because we have the technology to build it better, to provide more ecological solutions.
Amidst the hustle and bustle of the city, if our walls could speak, they would tell of the everyday tropical heat and the space constraint. But most importantly, the landscape that our garden city provides for high-density residential living. Like the hanging gardens of Babylon in a garden city, it must be the Arcadia. Embodying the idea of a tropical paradise, the Arcadia was an early condominium built on Arcadia Road, which has been declared a heritage road by the national parks. As the architect responsible for this inimitable design, Mr. Chua Kah Seng certainly made a mark in architectural history since 1983, when it was first constructed.
In 1972, Singapore introduced a condominium concept of living. The SIT four-story walk-up was considered outdated. So the condominium policy was still one of the most difficult for people to understand and able to comply with it. Because Hawaii at that time was probably the most advanced in condominium living. So we went to Hawaii 1972, soon after the introduction of the policy, and to see how they do it, how they control it, how they manage it, how they comply with the local codes.
The Arcadia is cherished and enjoyed by the residents who have made it their homes and gardens at the same time.
Vish and I moved here from India about 13 years ago, and we've been living on Arcadia Road for the past about 8 years, and at the Arcadia for about 3 years now.
I think Arcadia is very, very unique, but what really attracted us was the ground floor. The ground floor is fundamentally got about 800 to 900 square feet more than the average apartment. And that, lends itself to a fantastic front area where children play, we entertain our guests. And you'd be amazed how many mornings we spend there for breakfast, lounging around, or, have an afternoon nap or read a book.
Concept of Arcadia is basically inspired by the Hanging Garden of Babylon. The Hanging Garden of Babylon, in 4,000 years ago, that was considered the greatest engineering of all time.
We entertain a lot, and we've had guests. The first thing they always say when they come here is they can't believe this is in the middle of a city because it's so green, and a lesser architect may have just made a very closed, building which would not have taken advantage of the surroundings.
We want the building to look like as if they are growing from the ground. So we need a very gentle, graceful slope. It took us some time before we found the formula. 3 blocks have 3 different types of fountain and sculpture to identify one from the others on that. So by having that, then it provides certain reasonable privacy. For example, like this unit doesn't look directly into another unit, it's screened off. And of course, the central fountain serves as a sculpture on that, so they grow up from the basement up into the first and second story.
We've rarely used our air conditioning, especially in the hall area. So we leave our door open pretty much. As we're sitting here, you can feel the breeze. And the breeze kind of gets accentuated, as you walk across the corridors and, when you go to the central area. Not only just in your house, it's generally the entire, complex is quite breezy.
The atrium functions as a stack where the hot air rises in the center. In so doing, they induce the cold air from the outside, which blows in through the living room if the windows are open, and across it to the stack to replace it. So indirectly, it generates a cross-ventilation effect, which is most suitable for tropical living. Arcadia, in my opinion, I consider as a timeless. Timeless architecture, there are 2 ways of achieving it. One is by vertical landscaping, like what we are doing now. One is by architectural forms, that it doesn't get outdated. You see, any building with a very large landscaping, externally and internally and vertically, you will never get obsolete. And the third thing, it was good, the management must also be supportive.
It's remarkable how current this apartment still feels. I mean, when we tell people this is 30 years old, they find it hard to believe. It's so relevant to today's needs, today's lifestyle needs. So I think the architect must have been so progressive 30 years ago to, have come up with something that has stood the test of time so beautifully.
When I turn into this road, irrespective of whatever kind of day I've had, I've arrived, I've come home, I can switch off, and that's the way I feel about it every day.
Today, another private residential construct reminiscent of a vertical garden is the Newton Suites, situated between Kiang Guan Avenue and Newton Road. Newton Suites reflects simple, rational, and effective principles of designing for the tropics. Being restricted by the site area, the condominium was built as a point block. To fend off the heat from the sun, the 4 vertical surfaces of the 36-story residential tower are clad in metal mesh sun shading. The overhanging balconies provide shade for one another. Walls of creepers climb all the way up to landscape the building with as much natural elements as possible. On every 4th floor, a green communal space is created in the form of a sky garden at the lift lobby.
Landscape is used as a material in this building. We've tried to ensure that every vertical horizontal surface is actually landscape with natural elements. And we think that that might be a very sustainable way of developing high-rise living, especially in a dense environment like Singapore. We think that eventually Singapore would be a green city, now not just in terms of parks and boulevards that are green, but its buildings itself that forms the backdrop.
Using this approach, residents enjoy soothing surroundings of greenery, of which high-rise dwellers are normally bereft. But the long-term benefit to the environment is priceless, because the green areas of the building have far exceeded the original site area. This clearly shows how future cities can become much greener, even as structures are built higher and denser.
I think sustainability is a must. In our built environment, the impact our building has on the natural resources and the natural environment is tremendous. I think it's necessary that we take into consideration ways to alleviate the impact building has. It can come in the form of various technological advances that we have in building technology nowadays. It could come in the form of passive ideas that has been incorporated in Newton suites. But it is an imperative that we design with sustainability in mind, given the problems that's afflicting the world nowadays. In terms of global warming, in terms of climate change, we think that it is necessary. And I think the practitioners and the population at large has a responsibility to say, yes, I want to take part in creating a sustainable environment.
Walking about Singapore today, almost every corner within our limited land space is being well utilized by both high-rise and high-density commercial and residential structures. Imagine a people who know life primarily as living in confined space at high levels, with little contact with nature and the ground. Will there be sufficient social integration and harmony? If not, how can our architectural solutions evolve in the future to ensure quality of life? Or do we need to find alternative solutions? For Singapore, the air-conditioned nation, perhaps the integration of tropical solutions with sustainable designs is the answer. We hope these answers and more can be found in the architectural solutions in the not-so-far future.